change human nature. Every other king before and every other king after who promised to change human nature failed. In fact, in the Bible, kings who make those kinds of promises, kings who make themselves divine, are often pictured symbolically as beasts. Right? Daniel sees the beast coming out of the sea, and John, 2,000, more like 600 years later, sees a vision of a beast, coming out of the sea, and a land beast. So if somebody comes along and says, give me enough power, I'm a God-man, I'm above you all, but if you give me enough power, I will transform human nature and get rid of all badness in the world and all the consequences of evil, they don't turn themselves and us into gods, they turn themselves into beasts. If you're content to be a man, you can be a man. But if you're not content to be a man and you want to be a god, you don't become a god and you don't stay a man, you become bestial. And that's why throughout the scriptures, over and over again, the most recurring image for tyranny is an animal, a beast, a bear, or a leopard, right, depending on which of the ancient empires, ancient socialist empires you're talking about. Nebuchadnezzar became beast-like when he said, look what I've done, look what my power has done. And Christians understand that, and that's why it's in Christian civilization that we had the first free market orders. Now, there are people who said, oh, this free market thing works really good, forget God, and we'll just have the free market without him. But, of course, what we see is what's happening in Europe right now is once you throw God out, the freedom goes too. But with God, you can have freedom. And the reason is because you have the teaching that the state can't be divine because you already have somebody who's divine. You already have a God-man. So it's not Nero, and it's not Nebuchadnezzar, and it's not Obama, and it's not, Draghi or any, the head of the European Central Bank or any of those people. Only one divine man, only one theanthropos. Anybody else who tries to be that will end up being the opposite.
Do you believe that it is possible in the age of demagoguery that we live in, that and the media culture that we live in, that when we have someone do very, very well economically, there's the notion that it's at the expense of someone else? And I think this goes to the heart of Main Street, Wall Street, which is the one of the ways that it is put to us. And we can all sit there and say, look at the guy with the slick back hair. He's taking from us.
Right.
And then it goes to the very base of rich versus poor. Can we bring back the fact that productivity and using our godly gifts is a beautiful thing? It's an awesome thing. We get actually more resources to do for the church. We get to control those.
It's one of our highest levels of. It's one of our highest levels of worship. Mm-hmm. To produce wealth. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, not at all. No. But the question is, can we bring that back? Because maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I'm too into it. Maybe I'm just too down at times when I look at it and I think, I just see the demonization of people who are using their godly gifts, who are just as fallen, yes, in every way, and portions of them are not doing very good things with the resources. I get all that. Right. But I see people being demonized for using their godly gifts.
Yes.
And I'm concerned that we won't recover from that because we're in a place right now where we're seeing long-term unemployment and people are just looking to the state to fill the void because they don't trust freedom.
Right, because anymore. The state becomes the new family. It becomes the new provider.
Right.
Give us this day our daily bread, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that used to be something we asked God for, and now the president is the provider of our daily bread. And people look at people who've done well economically, and they say, well, that came from me. And what I'd say is, yes, sometimes it does. But that's under a socialist system, that if somebody has done well, they've taken it from someplace else. In a government budget, what one gets, another doesn't. In a welfare state, what one gets, another does not. You have to make, right, someone once said to budget is to choose. So if you have a fixed budget, if you're the federal government and you've got a fixed budget and you say, who do I give to? Do I give to women? Do I give to minorities? Do I give to the top so that it trickles down? That's trickle down economics. Do I give to the bottom so that it trickles up? Who do I give this limited resource of budget to? I have to take from one to give to another. But in a free market system, you can keep expanding the amount of wealth. And so somebody goes out there and produces a new good or a product, and they sell it. That's new wealth that's created. So the irony is that the ideology that tells us if somebody's wealthy, they took it from you, is the ideology that actually creates the system in which we really are being taken from. There really is a redistribution upwards in our country. What are the two highest income counties in America? The one just north of Washington, D.C., and the one just south of Washington, D.C. That is the great concentration of power and the great concentration of wealth, and it is taken from us. So our ruling class really is wealthy at our expense. It's not the entrepreneur who's taken from us. It's the taker who's taken from us. It's the people who crowd around government and say this is for the poor, but they take 30% of it and put it in their own pockets on the way. It's all the consultants and high-level bureaucrats and lobbyists, because once you have a government that's big, now you have to have all these people who are always trying to determine where it's going. Influence peddlers. And Ayn Rand, who got some things right, said aristocracy of influence. So I think that as Christians, we can rightfully look at our ruling class and say the things that Jesus said to the rich young ruler. The rich young ruler, not the rich young entrepreneur, or to Zacchaeus, the tax collector, there's only two people in the Bible that Jesus ever would talk to for whom the solution was for them to sell everything and give it away. And they both got wealthy off of government, the rich young ruler and Zacchaeus, the tax collector. Jesus mixed with other wealthy people, for instance, Joseph of Arimathea, who was an entrepreneur, who was close friends with Jesus, Jesus was buried in his tomb. He was family friends. Where's Jesus telling Joseph of Arimathea to sell it all and give it to the poor, right? No, but it's Zacchaeus, the tax collector, who's living off the people, who has to give that restitution. So there's lots of things in the Bible that talk about the rich in negative ways, like in the Epistle of St. James. But who is it? It's always the political class. It's always the crony capitalists. It's the money changers in the temple, government agency, with a government-granted monopoly with fixed prices, who Jesus becomes angry at. But the tin merchants, the entrepreneurs, the farmers, the fishermen, the small business owners, where's the wrath of Jesus against their wealth? Well, there isn't any, because it wasn't ill-gotten, it was earned.
Do we have a concept, and I think of environmentalism in this, but natural resources, that we have a limited amount and that we, as human beings, are the problem? And we haven't, I guess, in a sense of environmentalism, we haven't been given dominion, and therefore, as we go and press on into the future, it's our job to limit ourselves, to hold off and ration the resources that we have, and that all goes to
lifeboat
the
ethics.
State. Yes, yeah,
right. It's like there's just some little pool of water, and who's going to get it and who isn't. Like it's not expandable, but it is expandable. Thomas Malthus is the guy, a minister who misunderstood economics. Thomas Malthus wrote a book in 1798, an essay on population. He read the book of Genesis where it said, "Cursed is the ground because of you," and thought that was the only economic fact, and missed the fact that dominion was given and that all of the nations of the earth would be blessed through Abraham. He missed redemption. He only saw the fall. So Malthus had a misunderstanding, and he made that a very popular idea. It shows up in Ebenezer Scrooge in the story of A Christmas Carol.
By the way, you've got to release that again, your articles on that, and I want to do a show on that again.
All right, when we get closer to Christmas. Remember, Scrooge says, then let them die and decrease the surplus population. He's quoting, basically, almost literally quoting Thomas Malthus. The problem is the population has gone up, tenfold since Malthus wrote that. And we're much richer than we were in his day. And we're much wealthier. Population has doubled since Paul Ehrlich wrote The Population Bomb. And we're much richer than we were then. So are these people utterly data immune? Did they not study history at all? Do they just live in the universe of their own thoughts, their own anxieties, their own fears, and not see that when people are free, they solve problems? People are the solution. People aren't the problem. For the Malthusian, people are the problem, and then abortion and socialism and one-child policies and all the rest are the solution. But of course, China has a one-child policy, and they're still a very, very, very poor nation. Population density tends to go together with higher economic growth and higher wealth in most nations. So people are the solution. You know why? Because we're images of God. God made us to be the solution. And anybody who says that people are the problem is blocking God's movement in the world to solve the problem. They're blocking some future entrepreneur, some future inventor, some future technologist who might solve the next big world problem.
And it really goes to, well, what you wrote about in Ender's Game, from what I gather. And if we have just a few more minutes, Jerry, with you, it's great. If not, I understand if you have to go.
Absolutely.
Okay. But the question I have, Ender's Game, if you give me a thumbnail sketch, a brief synopsis of the novel that has been turned into a movie.
Well, I won't give. There's a kind of a surprise at the end, so we won't do spoilers. But Ender's Game is set about 200 years from now in a future in which there is an attempt at a world government under a global hegemon, where there are strict population controls and religions. Christianity is suppressed. Ender is a third, meaning he's a child who was born when there was a two-child limit. But his parents were given permission to have this little baby, bring him into the world. The mother is a Mormon and the father a Catholic named John Paul. And they were given permission to have a third child because the first two children were highly intelligent, and they needed highly intelligent children for the war effort against an alien species. So if you could prove that your child might be a candidate to be a great warrior, a great battle warrior, then you were allowed to have a third. But generally, thirds, that's what they call these children, were unwanted, they were hated, they were looked at, drain upon society. So Ender, Andrew is actually the boy's name, but his nickname is Ender, is a third, and he becomes a great warrior, and we're not going to get much into it beyond that, and is basically exploited in terrible ways by this global economic government.
And you speak to, obviously, the religious references, Christian references, and that is in the book, but some didn't make it to the movie. And it's interesting. It's more coming from a Mormon point of view. And as you know, Mormons are not Orthodox Christians, but there is some overlap. So you get biblical themes. Someone wrote to me and said, well, would you recommend this for Christian readers? And I'd say, sure, just as long as they understand that it's Mormon and that's not the same. Just adjust for that. But yeah, I mean, part of the interesting thing is Orson Scott Card, who's the writer of this novel, also is somebody who has given some interviews in which he says he's against same-sex marriage, and he's hated by the left for that reason. And so there were attempts to stop this movie from being made. There have been attempts to boycott it, just to punish him for having the politically incorrect view that marriage is between a man and a woman. And one of the things that's interesting is that, the novel's partly about religious repression, but there's religious repression going on in the attempt to squash the movie. The repression of what Mormons and Catholics and Bible-believing Christians and Orthodox Jews believe. And Hollywood doesn't understand. See, Hollywood thinks if they leave the religious references in the movie that they're making the meaning unclear. But they're making the meaning more clear because the struggle for freedom in history has never been the state versus the individual. The struggle has always been the state versus God. God's the protector of the individual. So if we think the fight is between the state and the individual, then we're not going to get it right because people inherently sense that we're not individuals. We're dependent on one another. We need each other. But what the Bible teaches is we do that without force or coercion through statism. We do it voluntarily under God through love. So individualism will not beat statism. It never does. God is the only God big enough to beat the pretend God, the state. And that's in the book Ender's Game. I think that's why the global hegemon is suppressing religion, because he recognizes that's the one force he can't control.
You can have some economic freedom, you can have some journalistic freedom, but if you're a tyrant, the one thing you really cannot allow is religious freedom, because that's the one thing powerful enough. The Spirit is the one thing powerful enough to topple you.
And one of the most, I believe, insidious attacks on religious freedom is something that is done not necessarily through the overt action of the state, but it's done culturally to silence Christians, to get Christians to stop engaging and speaking truth and love and being salt and light and withdrawing and giving up.
Yes.
And as you just mentioned, this book, obviously there are Christian themes, granted Mormon, yes, and the point I would say is the encouragement of saying, you have a plan, you have a purpose, God created you, and it's not about you as an individual, but it's who you are through Christ and pointing to Him. And that scares the wits out of the left oftentimes. And I say left generally because I know there are leftists listening to the show saying that doesn't scare me. It scares the status, and it also scares, I believe, the people that are taking God out of society who could be on the right, so to speak, in that way.
Yeah, and let's remember that when the Soviet Union was toppled, it started with prayer meetings. It started with the ascension of Karol Wojtyła to become John Paul, the Pope. Mm-hmm. It started in Romania, with a Protestant minister having prayer meetings in his house that just grew and grew and grew and grew until it became a mass resistance movement. The Ukrainian Orange Revolution, almost all of these great resistance movements in the Soviet Union, the core of them was Christians, because they're the people who say, you can take away my body, you can kill me, you can take away my life, but that's not taking away everything, because there's an afterlife. See, the idea of an afterlife is a challenge to tyrants. If I believe that everything I have in this world, that a tyrant can take everything away. But if I believe that the tyrant kills me, all he does is send me closer to God, then I don't fear him as much. See, the doctrine of the resurrection is a doctrine that tyrants have always feared. And they're right to. I mean, that's part of what's going on with the cross. Jesus is doing a lot of the things on the cross, but one of the things he's saying is, I was killed and now I'm alive again. Caesar killed me. Guess what? Caesar's not the biggest thing in the universe. Caesar killed me, but I'm back. So I'm stronger than Caesar. And then hundreds of thousands of Christians said, okay, I see. Jesus was resurrected when Caesar killed him. If Caesar kills me, eventually I'll be resurrected too. Therefore, I'm not afraid. Therefore, I won't recant my faith when Caesar orders me to on threat of death.
Jerry Bowyer, pleasure, privilege as always, the chairman of Bowyer Research and the Forbes contributor. It is really, each and every time we talk, it's something along the lines of a theme of, first and foremost, putting Christ first in our lives and understanding that gives... I come away from these discussions and there's optimism. And you're not doing Tony Robbins to me, Jerry, or the audience, but you are doing something. You're reminding us that Christ is right there, that we do have a purpose, that we were created for a purpose, and through Him all things are possible. And that's just an overused word, but I will use it as Brett Michaels would. That's awesome.
It is.
I appreciate it.
There's a time that awesome really belongs in our vocabulary.
Exactly.
There's a real full of awe. That's what we should be, full of awe.
And again, if it is all right, I'd like to post and share your article on Facebook, if that is okay with you.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Great. Thank you, Jerry.
I'm honored. Thank you, my friend. I always enjoy our talks.
Yes, me too, and everybody does. Great, Jerry Bowyer, ladies and gentlemen. And he'll be back with us in a couple Thursdays, as always. Coming up, you see a smile on my face. I get to talk to Jerry, and then I get to talk to Pastor Aaron Free. It just gets better. And then we'll go over the Obama News Conference, and then my furrowed brow takes over. But there's some good things. What's good that came out of the press conference? There's good. Are you just trying to see something that's not there? Are you being Pollyannish in a way of how this is all going to work out for good? Take it easy. Brain Durham's Nothing But Truth. Go to the Facebook page, like the page. You could also sign on the prayer for those to come to Christ, which we'll do at the end of this hour with Pastor Free. Brain Durham's Nothing But Truth. Proudly on, oh, say it with me now, AFR Talk.